More problems in Rosie land. Now even the LA Times editorializes that Rosie should be yanked from The View and put in a mental institution. We'll have that story coming up. The LA Times now says ABC should take Rosie off The View and institutionalize her. And coming up next, is it time for ABC to pull the plug on Rosie O'Donnell and her crazy views? And later ahead. But first, tonight, new calls for ABC and Barbara Walters to boot Rosie from The View. Well, why would they want to do a thing like that? Oh yeah, here's why. Take a look.
I do believe that it defies physics for the World Trade Center Tower 7, Building 7, which collapsed in on itself. It is impossible for a building to fall the way it fell without explosives being involved. They've been treating them like animals, Elizabeth, not like human beings. They have hoods over their head. They are tortured on a daily basis. It's impossible for some people to believe that the Iranians in any way could ever do anything ethical in any capacity. That they've somehow been dehumanized to the point where they're not people, they're just the enemy. They're terrorists. Don't fear the terrorists. They're mothers and fathers. Someone, I believe, should call for the impeachment of George Bush. You want to know why we go into Iran? For the money. Listen. That's why we would do it. And that's corrupt. We're able to get the presidential seal on paper towels, but we still haven't cleaned up New Orleans.
And you know, it's that unique brand of crazy that led a columnist for the LA Times to write today, quote, "Normally we expect such outbursts from poor souls who rage against unseen threats at bus stations and public libraries. But ABC isn't obliged to give O'Donnell a nationally televised platform. Barbara Walters knowingly gives a soapbox to a wacko." So will Barbara Walters and ABC finally pull the plug on Rosie? Here now is Bob Cohn. He's the author of the book, Journalistic Fraud, and Steve Adubato. He's MSNBC media analyst. Steve, let me start with you. LA Times knowingly gives a soapbox to a wacko. What do you think about that?
It's about right.
ABC, I mean. Is that fair?
It is fair, and she has been a wacko on the air. You just showed the best of Rosie or the worst of Rosie, depending upon how you want to look at it. But I have to tell you, Joe, I'll say what I said last night. I'll keep saying it over and over again. Rosie O'Donnell has a right to speak like an idiot on the air. So does Ann Coulter, so does Rush Limbaugh, so do all sorts of people out there. And in fact, anyone who calls for her being thrown off the air, I question, then who's next? I believe as broadcasters we have to protect each other, even the obnoxious broadcasters who say outrageous things. That's what free speech is.
Let me read you this quote from the LA Times, and I'll tell you, this is what a lot of conservatives believe, because the LA Times speculated today on why Rosie hasn't been fired so far, saying, so far O'Donnell's gotten a free pass because she isn't a mere wacko, but a left-wing wacko. If O'Donnell sounded like Pat Robertson, the network would call in the butterfly net almost immediately. But because O'Donnell's crazy accusations are directed rightward at that evil George W. Bush, it's considered forgivable excess. And I got to tell you, Steve, from where I sit, that certainly seems accurate. If somebody like Pat Robertson or Rush Limbaugh or somebody else from the right makes these type of crazy accusations, the butterfly nets immediately come out and they get booted from whatever position they're in.
Joe, I appreciate your point of view, but I respectfully disagree. When Rush Limbaugh did what I believe, and we talked about it on this program, what I believe to be one of the most offensive, obnoxious things ever, when he made fun, not just of Michael J. Fox and saying he disagreed with his Democratic or liberal views, he tried to imitate what he perceived to be.
But that's Rush Limbaugh's own show. The guy's bringing in $30 million.
Joe?
ABC, though, and Barbara Walters is the one, they're the ones that hire Rosie O'Donnell. She works for them. Rush Limbaugh would have to fire himself to get off the Rush Limbaugh show. This is different.
Joe, respectfully, those radio stations could begin to say we're not going to carry him anymore. You know that could happen, but his ratings are great.
Wouldn't a better analogy actually be the Disney company that owns ESPN boots Rush Limbaugh off after he speculates as to why Donovan McNabb gets a free pass and other quarterbacks don't?
It's a good
compared to Disney also deciding that Rosie O'Donnell can say that the American government killed 3,000 people on 9/11 and they get to stay. Isn't that the better analogy?
But they also got rid of Bill Maher after 9/11 when he made the absurd comment that the 9/11 terrorists were somehow, courageous. So they got rid of him then.
Well,
There's a lot of inconsistency
That's
there,
a great point. Let me bring in Bob Cohn. Bob, why is it? I mean, because here I am talking about how ABC may be discriminating against conservatives, but they went after Bill Maher back in 2002, didn't they?
Well, they went after Bill Maher. Sure, they went after Bill Maher. It was a different period of time. It was just after 9/11. He said something that was pretty inflammatory at the time. Now ABC feels apparently that they're willing to let her get away with this stuff because Bush is out of favor and the government is out of favor and letting her say outrageous things. I think the more interesting thing that's occurred in the past 24 hours, Joe, is the fact that you just used the word Disney instead of ABC. And Bill O'Reilly has been using Disney for the past 2 years rather than ABC.